When my dad was around 50, he got an African gray parrot. He always loved parrots his entire life, so I was glad he got one after his retirement. He named the bird Paco. My dad taught Paco a great vocabulary of words and actually trained him to understand the meaning behind certain words like hello, how are you, food, thank you, good, and a few others. My dad passed away at the age of 70, and with that it was time to decide between my brothers and me what would happen to Paco. My brother and sister did not want the responsibility of taking Paco to their homes, in addition to the fact that their spouses were also against it. But I couldn't bear the thought of gifting it to a new home. Paco was and is one of my last connections with my dad. In a sense, he was her best friend. So I decided that I would take it to my house. I put his cage in the living room of my house. My house doesn't have a basement, so the living room is considered the lowest level of the house. Paco is a moderately noisy bird. He may be a talker for a few hours of the day, usually earlier, but later in the day and at night he calms down. When he gets too loud, I put a blanket over the cage, and that usually calms him down. I watch TV in the living room at night to keep him company, and then around 10 o'clock I go to my room to let him sleep. That's basically the story behind Paco. I've been taking care of him for 2 years now, so I know exactly how he's behaving and when he's acting out of the ordinary. Speaking of acting out of the ordinary, there was one night in December, around 11 p.m., that Paco started making noises while trying to sleep. I sleep with the door open since I live alone, and I need to be able to hear if something is going on in the house. Hearing him make his shrill noises after dark, especially so late at night, was undoubtedly unusual, and something was irritating him. I went down to the living room to see what was bothering him. He was wide awake on the lower perch of the cage. He looked at me and said things like, "Hello, how are you?" and his name, while moving his head up and down, moving his whole body in the process as if he were dancing. I tried to feed him, but he didn't eat, so I covered him with the blanket, waiting for him to calm down. I was in the kitchen when I stopped because I kept making noises, and I had the feeling that I wasn't going to stop. I had work the next day, and I couldn't afford to lose sleep because of him. I didn't really know what to do. To this day, I'm not exactly a bird expert. I went back down and discovered it. She continued to do her little dance, moving her head and body and making sounds of anguish. I didn't realize it until I thought I heard something in the pantry cupboard, a few feet from his cage. I walked over and put my hand on the pantry light switch, which was outside the door. The door has one of those big panes of glass that many pantry doors have, so when I flipped the light switch, I saw the silhouette of a body inside. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I chose to fight. I opened the door, screaming, to get my adrenaline pumping, and grabbed the man in the pantry cupboard and threw him on the floor. He tried to fight, but I easily overpowered him and had him in what I can best describe as a chokehold. He was a homeless man in his 50s, with a smell that gave him away. I shouted at him, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" He tried to grab my face, possibly to gouge out my eyes or something, but I kept squeezing his neck and hitting him. During all this, Paco was going crazy in his cage. When the man on the ground seemed weak enough, I literally ran to the nearest phone and immediately returned to keep him on the ground while I called 911. The man was taken to jail, but he had no identification or anything. He was a homeless person and had nothing to his name, so he was considered what some people call unattachable, meaning even if he tried to sue him, he wouldn't get anything out of him. That night I had ransacked my pantry and opened jars of peanut butter, boxes of cookies and all sorts of other canned and boxed foods. If it hadn't been for my dad's parrot, I don't know what else that man would have taken or done in my house. I am grateful for Paco, and I like to think that part of my dad is taking care of me through him. This story happened when I was a junior in high school. To give a bit of context, here's some background information. Back then, I was a pretty involved student. I took all the difficult classes and participated in various sports. I was always busy and didn't have much time to myself, and in part I was grateful for that. It provided me with an escape from a world in which my parents had recently separated and my older brother had just left for college. It was just me and my younger brother. He was also a swimmer and a smart kid in his own right. We were very similar even to this day, but probably due to the stress that our family situation imposed on us at the time, we didn't get along at all. One of those rainy winter days in the Midwest, I had spent my time at school and swimming, and I still had to sit for several hours doing homework. This time I had to write an essay for an advanced class that I wasn't really interested in. I left my swim bag at the door when I got home and looked around to see if anyone was there. Empty. Dad must be with Peter at swim practice. His club team had the schedule at the pool after the school team finished. I stuffed a handful of snacks into my mouth and went downstairs to the basement, which was my office, to do some schoolwork. The house was middle class, 2-story, with an unfinished basement, except for what I called my office. In a past career, my dad used to work from home, but he didn't anymore. I was the only one who used that place, so my family, or what was left of it, called it Martine's office. So I made my way through the concrete floor and unfixed carpet samples to the only finished room in the basement. I turned on the light. It was just like any other night after practice. I still had hours of homework to do, so I turned on the computer and started typing. I was typing for what seemed like an hour, trying to put into words what the concept of hedonism and the picture of Dorian Gray meant to me, as best I could, or as convincing as I could. Out of the darkness, I heard my younger brother call me. Martine, come up." Almost reflexively, I replied, "Pedro, I'm working. What do you need?" We yelled around the house like brothers do, but it took me a minute to realize that I hadn't heard him come home. I didn't hear back just for a couple of minutes. Then again, I heard my younger brother's voice singing, Martin, come up." It felt strange to hear those words echo on the dark concrete floor. He was supposed to be at swim practice. I wrote back asking if I needed anything, but again, I got no answer. I thought about starting my rehearsal again, but the family situation was delicate at best, and I didn't want to get in trouble if my brother really needed something. I decided to get up and go find out for myself. I went up the basement stairs as only a high school student can and called my brother again. "Pedro, what's wrong? I'm very busy." I checked the entire main floor looking for my younger brother or even signs that he was home. There were no shoes or backpacks, so I wasn't home, and there wasn't a car in the driveway either. The only reason my dad would be away at that time would be to pick him up. Satisfied, I returned to the stairs when I heard my younger brother's voice resound, Martine, come up." This time, all the hairs on my body stood on end. It just didn't make sense. I had to be in practice, and if he really needed me, he would have come looking for me. I went to the base of the stairs on the second floor and called out to him once again, "Pedro, what's wrong? Are you okay?" For a minute, there was no response. "Pedro, I'm very busy. Can you tell me what's wrong?" The silence lasted too long as he looked down the dark staircase. Logically, I had no reason to believe that there was anyone up there until I heard Pedro's voice speak calmly this time and not call me with his singing tone those same 4 words. Martine, come up." "What?" I asked quietly. I couldn't comprehend the situation. I made a quick inventory of any likely scenarios. Break-in, wrong voice, a joke. I would have seen something by now. It had to be Peter, and maybe helping him would make me a good brother. So I started up the stairs, my heart pounding with every step, and I was about to reach the dark second-floor landing when I heard the hum of the garage door motor. I ran down the stairs again and looked out the window. It was my father's sedan, and he and my younger brother were getting out of the car. I staggered from the window to the hallway where they would enter and felt my heart almost stop beating. I collapsed on the floor and began to cry uncontrollably. This was about 15 years ago when I was a child. I was with my best friend Omar somewhere abandoned, like a family resort or bungalow colony in New York. It was next to a main road, and then you went down a private dirt road. It was a fairly large property with lots of old and abandoned buildings, including at least 10 small bungalows, a main lounge, a few bathing stations, and an indoor pool house. There was also an outdoor swimming pool, a shuffleboard table play area, and a children's playground. Everything was old and in poor condition, with tall grass and overgrown on the premises. We found this place accidentally once while walking down Route 209, but we didn't explore it that day. We came back another night, and when we arrived, it was already past sunset. The sun was saying goodbye to the sky, getting very dark, but we didn't want to come during the day for fear of being caught and accused of trespassing. We brought walkie-talkies and flashlights to communicate when we parted. We started looking at the bungalows together. Most looked the same and were relatively small, with 1 or 2 beds each, a small kitchen and a bathroom. Some had a small living room. Halfway through checking these bungalows, I separated from Omar because he was moving quite slowly. I tried to enter the building that appeared to be the main hall or office, but all the entrances were locked. I spoke to Jackson on the walkie-talkie to tell him that the large building was closed, but he didn't answer. I wondered if it was out of range from where he was. 2 minutes later, I found myself in one of the 2 bathhouse buildings, which was probably about 400 square feet. There were no doors in the building, which was unusual. It only had 2 large openings, one for the men's bathroom and one for the women's. I remember the signs were faded and worn. Then I saw these red marks on the dirty old concrete floor of the bathroom. I'm not going to say that they looked like bloody footprints, but I couldn't explain what those red marks might be then, and I still can't say for sure now. Anyway, it was completely dark inside that bathroom, and it was the first building I was afraid to enter. I tried to communicate with Omar again, hoping that this time he would be within range. I pressed the button on the walkie-talkie and said, "Hey, where are you?" When I released the button, I heard the sound of the signal made by the receiving walkie-talkie after receiving a message, coming from inside the bathroom. I almost had a heart attack. I thought Omar must already be there, hence the red footprints. I called his name, and the echo was heard inside the bathroom. I was about to enter the bathroom thinking he was hiding to play a joke on me when I heard Omar's voice calling me from a distance, outside in the dead of night. I heard him approaching, although I couldn't see him in the dark, but obviously he saw my light, so I shouted to him, "I found your walkie-talkie." I started to go into the bathroom, but he said, "Don't go in there, I was never there." That's when I turned around and hurried out of there. I pressed and released the talk button quickly on my walkie-talkie, again causing the signal sound inside that dark women's bathroom. Omar and I looked at each other for half a second, and then started running in the direction we came from. We arrived back on Route 209 and had to stop to catch our breath. That's when Omar told me that inside one of the bungalows he entered, he tried to reach me by walkie-talkie, but I wouldn't respond, which meant we were probably out of range. Then he heard a noise in the living room of the bungalow. As he turned, his flashlight revealed an older woman almost running towards him. He dropped his walkie-talkie and flashlight and ran out of the bungalow. He ran into the darkness and hid, trying not to make a noise for fear of being followed. He hid for an indeterminate amount of time before looking around and seeing my flashlight on the other side of the field, near the toilets. The most likely explanation for me is that some drug addict was hiding or living in that abandoned bungalow and, for some reason, lunged at Jackson and picked up his walkie-talkie. What was he doing in that bathroom? Who knows? Maybe drugs. Maybe the bathroom in the bungalow didn't work. But what I don't know is why there was a trace of what appeared to be blood there. Those are my theories, but I can't explain everything, and that's the scariest part. For a while now, something strange has been happening every time I turn off the light in my room. Each night, as the lamp's glare fades and darkness takes over the room, voices begin to whisper in the shadows. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the voices were real, raw, as if they were whispers of souls lost in the abyss. I tried to ignore them, but every time I tried to fall asleep, they became more intense, more persistent. The first time I heard them, I was lying on my bed with my eyes closed, trying to sleep. Then, a voice whispered in my right ear, so close that I could feel the icy breath on my skin. "Why did you abandon us?" said the voice, full of pain and reproach. I opened my eyes wide, but the room was empty. Only darkness surrounded me. Shaking, I turned on the light and looked around, but there was no one else. I thought maybe it was just a hallucination, a product of my tired mind. But that night and all the following nights, the voices returned, louder and louder, more persistent. I tried every way to escape them. Earplugs, loud music, even sleeping with the light on. But nothing worked. The voices always found a way to sneak into my mind, whispering their terrible words in the darkness. I began to lose my sanity. The nights became an endless torment, and during the day I struggled to stay awake, fearful of what might happen when night came. My friends and family noticed my change, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could he explain to them that he was being tormented by voices in the dark? Finally, I reached a breaking point. One night, after hours of fighting the voices, I got out of bed and walked to the light switch. I knew what I had to do. He had to face the voices once and for all. With my heart pounding in my chest, I turned off the light. The room was plunged into total darkness, and the voices began their ominous whisper. But this time, instead of fearing them, I plucked up the courage. "Who are you?" I asked loudly, defiantly. There was a moment of silence, and then the voices responded clearer than ever. "We are those who dwell in darkness. We are the ones who will never leave you alone." I froze for a moment, taking in his words. What did they mean? What beings were these who claimed to dwell in darkness itself? Then, a chilling thought enveloped me. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell me as a child, tales of creatures lurking in the shadows, entities that fed on human fear. I always thought they were just stories to scare children, but now, in front of these voices, I knew they were real. Filled with terror, I turned on the light again and waited for the voices to disappear. But something changed. The voices did not fade. Instead, I felt a tangible presence in the room, a shadow that didn't dissolve in the light. The voices became louder, clearer, full of inhuman malice. "We are the darkness," they said in unison, and a dark figure began to materialize in front of me. Their shapes were undefined, changing like dense smoke that did not disperse. I stepped back, stumbling over the furniture as the figure moved slowly. His icy breath enveloped me, and his eyes, empty and soulless, stared at me. I tried to scream, but my voice choked in my throat. Shadows enveloped me, and darkness took over my mind. Now, I am trapped in darkness, a prisoner of these shadow-dwelling entities. The voices are never silent, whispering endlessly in my ears, eternally reminding me that there is no escape. The light never returns, and I am doomed to live in the shadows, surrounded by the creatures of darkness, knowing that my soul is lost forever.